Welcome back to the Radio Academy podcast. I'm your host, Georgy Jamieson, and this week we meet another of our fellows, Phil Maguire OBE. Phil is the Chief Exec of the Prison Radio Association, and he's passionate about the PRA and what it means to prisoners and their families. Phil was honoured with a fellowship at last year's Radio Academy Festival, and I asked him how he felt when he heard the news.
Well, it was like a career dream. Radio is my life, or a big part of it. And the Radio Academy, since I started working in radio, has been something that I've admired and respected. And I'm really delighted and honoured that I get to work with the Radio Academy. So when I was sitting in the main room at the Radio Academy Festival, and I saw Roma Hooper, who used to be my boss. She was the chair of the Prison Radio Association for many years, of which I'm chief exec. When I saw her walk onto the stage, I kind of guessed that it could only mean one thing, and it was that moment the penny dropped, and I almost burst into tears. And I had to hold myself together because I thought, I think I might know what's coming here. And then when she started talking, the words that she used were just so, they meant so much. They were so beautiful and warm. And, you know, it's a really odd thing. You spend all these years working in radio and doing what you do because you love it. And then suddenly someone stood on a stage saying really nice things about you in front of all of the people that you admire, the people that are part of your, you know, the wider radio family. So, yeah, it was amazing. It was really amazing, Georgie.
Tell me about this love of radio. Where does it come from? When did you first realise that this was something you wanted to do?
Well, I'm quite old, so I'm not that old. I'm 52. I'm 52. But when I was a kid,
that's not old. Can I just reassure you? That's not.
When I was a kid, I remember when there were only 3 TV channels. I remember when Channel 4 launched. I think I was 10 when Channel 4 launched. They weren't even on 24 hours a day. They used to get, when they ran out of programmes, they used to go off. Telly was not the all-pervasive thing that it is now. And of course, we had no internet back then. I guess you could describe it as quite a tumultuous childhood. There was a lot going on in my family and in my background, and radio was my sanctuary. When I eventually stopped sharing a room with my brother, I'm one of 4 boys, and me and my brother shared a room for many years, and we used to both listen to the radio to sort of get us to sleep at night and to bond over something and to just have something to take us away from where we were, I guess. And then when I eventually got my own room, I was that archetypal kid that would almost cuddle up to my radio under the duvet at night and listen to radio. And a lot of that was talk radio. A lot of that was phone-ins. And so that was just a real insight into a world that was nearby. It felt nearby and it felt tangible, but it wasn't my immediate surroundings. So that was where the love of radio started. At home, my life was accompanied by the almost constant hum of the friendly tone of BBC Radio 2, which was my mum's radio station of choice. So it was on all the time. It was on at home, in the kitchen, in the car, Radio 2, Radio 2, Radio 2. And then later on, and this was before podcasts were a thing, I discovered the joy that is Radio 4, and I fell in love with Radio 4.
You said that you listened to a lot of talk radio at night and then a love of Radio 4. So is it always been about the power of speech radio for you rather than maybe music radio?
A bit of both, really. I think the fact that Radio 2 was always on at home, so there was always that music in the background, I think that brought a huge amount to my life. I remember specific memories of being at a petrol station, sitting in the car, I think pre-seatbelts, when my mum was pumping petrol into the car and the radio was still on and the Jackson 5 were playing. Music was always a really, really special thing that radio could bring into your life. And this was before Spotify, of course. You'd have to buy a record, or you'd tape something from a friend, or you'd tape something from the radio. So music was an important part of my listening. But as I developed my own habits, it was the human voice. It was people talking to each other, people talking about everything and nothing, people talking about inconsequential nonsense, or people tackling the big issues of the day. It was those important conversations that became more relevant to my life and more influential.
Where did your radio career start?
I used to be a residential social worker. I used to work in children's homes. And it was a job that I really enjoyed in my hometown of Manchester. I worked hard, I was good at it, but I knew that it wasn't the long-term thing. And I was struggling to work out what I wanted to do. I had decided, after a really interesting conversation with one of my brilliant friends, Anne-Claire, she and I had a conversation about my future. And she said, what is it you really want to do? And I said, I really want to make factual radio. And she said, well, go and bloody do it then. I had decided that I was going to change careers. I had decided that I was going to do something about this, and I wasn't sure what it was. And I was at a Christmas party and I met this bloke and we got chatting. He said to me, "What is it you do?" And I said, "Well, I work in children's homes. I'm a residential social worker, but I want to make factual programs. I want to change career." And I felt quite brave saying that to him. And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm the editor of the newsroom at Granada TV. Why don't you come and see me on Monday?" That was TV. My first sort of venture was into TV. And I went to see him on Monday. So I took a couple of weeks off work and did a couple of weeks work experience at Granada TV, working on a couple of different current affairs programs, including The Late Debate, which was hosted by the amazing Anthony H. Wilson, Tony Wilson. So I worked in TV for a little while, and then I carried on part-time as a runner, production assistant at Granada. And it was working there that made me realise that this media stuff is what excites me, and this is where the future is. But it also made me realise that radio was where it was at, because radio, as I think Alistair Cook once said, radio's like TV, but with better pictures. I knew that radio was where it was at, but I then took a big decision to sell. I'd bought a house with a friend of mine, we'd renovated it, and that was an exciting thing to do as a young man. And then I sold my share in that house to fund a master's in broadcast journalism, which was amazing. Going back to university and studying radio was just so joyful, and I was learning so much. But the opportunity that it gave me was I had to go and get work experience. So I had a real excuse to go knock on the door of broadcasters to say, "I'm doing a master's in broadcast journalism. I need to get some work experience as part of my course. Please, can you accommodate me?" And the two places I went to were the documentaries department at BBC Radio 4 that was then based in Birmingham. And I also knocked on the door of the brand new Jeremy Vine show at BBC Radio 2. So it was just at the point when Jeremy Vine had taken over from Jimmy Young. I think it was in very, very early 2003 that had happened. I went and I spent a week in Birmingham with BBC Radio 4 documentaries, and then I contacted the Jeremy Vine show, and the then editor and still a very close friend of mine, the amazing Phil Jones, said, "We don't do work experience, but come and see me for a chat. Come and watch the show go out." So I went to watch the show go out, and I was very, very aware that I needed to ask smart and intelligent questions, but not too many and not get in the way. I clicked with Phil, we got on really well, and he said, "Well, what are you doing tomorrow? Do you want to come back in?" So I went back in the next day, and I ended up producing an item on the show the next day. Like, just remarkable. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was like pitching ideas at the team meeting, and then, "You're coming back in tomorrow, you're coming back in tomorrow." And then at the end of that week, he said, "Are you coming back in next week?" And I said, "Well, I can, but only if you pay me."
Yeah, I've run out of holiday now.
Exactly. So he gave me a freelance contract, and I worked as a freelancer, and then I got a 3-month contract, then I got a 6-month contract as an assistant producer, and then eventually I was working as a producer on the Jeremy Vine show. I actually didn't go back to university to finish my master's. I finished it from London. I moved to London and got a job at the Jeremy Vine show and worked as a producer there. And I absolutely loved it. Learned loads, worked with amazing people, told compelling stories. Occasionally was on air reporting from different events. I remember the Make Poverty History Rally, I was reporting from Trafalgar Square. When George Bush came to London, I was there. When England won the Rugby World Cup, I was reported from the streets there. So this was like real exciting stuff, being on air and producing and learning loads. So that was my journey into the world of working in radio.
You were brave though, weren't you? I mean, they're all brave things to do. I mean, you met the right person at the party and you clicked with Phil, but to go back off to university and do your masters, to just go down to London and then to ask the right questions and for them to say, "Come back again tomorrow, come back again tomorrow." There's quite a lot of courage there, Phil.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I was
You're
just
being modest.
I was just trying to make it work. I don't know. I think it didn't feel brave to me. It just felt exciting. You know, it felt like an opportunity. I mean, at the beginning, it was a bit scary because it's like, how do you change direction? How do you navigate this new world? And I wasn't from a world where I knew anybody that worked in media. It was all brand new to me, and people like me didn't really do these jobs. Right at the beginning, it felt a little bit intimidating, but from the minute I stepped foot into Granada Television and from there then into the university to study broadcast journalism at master's level, I just felt at home. I just felt like I'd found my people. I felt like I knew what I was doing. And with that came confidence. And with that, I guess, came bravery. And I was just looking for opportunities. I was trying to meet the right people, and good people as well. I didn't just want to meet people that could give me opportunities. I wanted to meet people that I had something in common with, that I felt an affinity with, that I felt were doing things for the right reason. And I actively sought out good people that were working in this field. And I've been really, really lucky to work with some amazing good people along the way.
After the Jeremy Vine show, still with the BBC, but it's Prison Radio Project Manager. That was a brand new project, wasn't it, for the BBC?
I was at the Jeremy Vine show for about 3 years when I discovered this opportunity, which was a secondment from the BBC to manage a partnership project as the BBC Prison Radio Project Manager. And that was a 9-month opportunity. So I negotiated with the Jeremy Vine show to see if they would let me go. I applied for the job, I got it, and then I moved to Birmingham. And for 9 months, I worked in Birmingham as the BBC's Prison Radio Project Manager. That was developing the work that had previously been done around prison radio in the UK, and that centred around Radio Feltham. So Radio Feltham was at Feltham Young Offender Institution. It had been set up in 1994. It had done some incredibly innovative work, but it had had very little professional input. And it remained the only prison radio project in the UK for many, many years. And so the people that set that up had written to Greg Dyke when he was the Director General of the BBC to see whether the BBC were interested in exploring the potential for prison radio to do more than it was doing just at Feltham. And that was what I was charged with doing. During those 9 months living in Birmingham, I set up 2 new prison radio projects. We altered the focus of prison radio. We really, really tightly focused on what information people living in prison needed to hear to help them get through their sentences and to help them prepare for release. We looked really carefully at how we could produce content that was relevant and credible to that audience. And what that meant was ensuring that it wasn't me presenting it, but that it was the people living in prison were presenting it. So I worked very closely with small groups of people living in those prisons to help them develop presentation skills, and so that they were presenting the programs, they were asking the questions in a way that the audience would understand. So we launched these 2 new projects, and after 9 months, we hosted a launch event, a celebration event inside HMP Birmingham, better known locally as Winson Green Prison. It was amazing. Lots of people standing around patting each other on the back, and I must say, lots of white men with grey hair and grey suits from the Ministry of Justice and from the BBC, all congratulating each other on a job well done. And I then asked the question that just brought the room into silence, which was, this has been a pilot. Everyone seems to agree that it's been a success. What happens next? And nobody had thought about what happens next. There was no plan for what happened. If this pilot is successful, what happens next? Nobody thought about that. So at that moment, I realised that I was going to have to leave my job at the BBC and go and work with others to found this new organisation, this charity, the Prison Radio Association. So that was in mid-2006. I left the BBC and helped to set up the Prison Radio Association, and I've never looked back.
How important is the role of the Prison Radio Association to prisoners and their families? What does it give them?
It gives them an awful lot, actually. It gives them an awful lot. And I think that, where do I start with all of this? I think that because I'm talking to an audience of people that possibly are familiar with and understand and love radio, but might not necessarily know much about the world of prisons, I think it's worth just saying something about the role of prisons in this country. Generally, if you ask people what prisons are for, they'll generally sort of fish around for ideas and then say to punish people, to rehabilitate people. And the idea of prisons is to do both of those things. But I think if you take as read that the punishment is the loss of liberty, that putting people behind bars because of crimes they've committed, that is the punishment. Them being in prison for their sentence should therefore be an opportunity for growth and for development and for rehabilitation. So I'm not saying that punishment isn't an important thing for society and for people to see that punishment is being done and justice is being done, but prison offers an opportunity to do some work with some people, to get them to reflect on their own circumstances, to get them to develop some skills and to help prepare them for life after prison. Do we want people to go to prison and sit in there and get angrier and become better skilled criminals for when they come out? Or do we want them to spend that time doing useful stuff and to come out better suited to a life free of crime on release? And I think the latter is what we're looking for. So prison radio, what role does it play in the lives of prisoners? Before prison radio was a thing, most people would get information in prison through leaflets and posters. And there's a statistic which has been bandied about for years, which is the average reading age of an adult male prisoner in this country is the same as an 11-year-old on average, which means there are an awful lot of people in prison who have had a terrible experience of schools. They've failed at school or probably more appropriately, they've been failed by the school system. Therefore, expecting them to get the information they need through leaflets and posters is ridiculous. So what we did, we created a radio station which reaches prisoners right across the estate. It broadcasts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we do a whole host of stuff on there. But essentially, we provide companionship, belonging. We give people in prison a voice, so to give them an opportunity to express themselves and be respected for that. Crucially, we give people in prison an opportunity to hear information that will help them and support them through their sentences. So the schedule is wide and varied. We play music, we have chats, we play documentaries, we talk about really important issues. Crucially, what we do is we work in partnership with loads of organisations. So last year we worked in partnership with, I think it was 324 organisations, different government departments, different NGOs and charities that work either directly in the field of prisons and criminal justice, or they work alongside. So it might be organisations that work on drug rehabilitation, family relationships, homelessness, financial literacy. An important part of what we do with National Prison Radio is we take their messages and we broadcast them in easy to listen to, interesting, entertaining radio programs or radio spots that deliver to people in prisons information that is useful and actionable. And it is an absolute lifeline. It has become part of the furniture of prison life. And we do lots of research. Over the years, we've consistently looked at our audience measurements and our listening figures, and approximately over the last decade or so, we know that nearly 90% of people in prison listen to the National Prison Radio for an average of about 10 hours a week, which is, phenomenal figures. We have a free phone line that people can phone from any prison and leave a voicemail, and we get in excess of 4,000 voicemails every month from the prison population of 80 plus thousand. We have a great relationship with our audience. They are loyal, they are growing, and I think if you ask almost anybody in prison what role National Prison Radio plays, they will say it's a really important part of their experience and of giving them an opportunity to reflect and to grow and to develop.
And also, as well, this extends to life after prison, because there are podcasts now, one of which is called Life After Prison. And National Prison Radio has given opportunity to ex-prisoners beyond when they've come out and they've found work in audio and radio.
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID was a really interesting time for us because, COVID was a really interesting time for everybody who worked in radio. And it was probably as a result of COVID that we can now do this. Georgie, we're not sitting next to each other in the same room. I'm speaking to a microphone in my home office. I'm looking at you on a screen and you're doing the same thing. And an awful lot of us became familiar with this way of working because of COVID. What happened to us during COVID is that we had to pull all of our civilian staff out of the prisons that we work in. Our two main bases are in Brixton Prison in South London and in Style Prison near Manchester in Cheshire, which is a prison for women. And we've got teams in both. We had to pull them both out, which means that we lost access to our studios and we lost access to all of our presenters and our co-producers, people living in prisons. So we had to scramble. We had to think about what to do. We, as a civilian staff team, started to present programs and fill in the gaps and try and keep the station alive. Unfortunately, some of our staff team, almost a third of our staff team, are people that have lived in prison. We still had some of that understanding of the conditions that people were living in. We still had some of that credibility, some of that lived experience expertise on our staff team. But what we did then was we started to get in touch with some of the very best people we'd ever worked with over the last 10 or 15 years. Phoning people up, do you remember us? You used to present a programme on National Prison Radio. Would you like to do that again? So we started to link back in with people, and we quickly built a network of former prisoners, people that used to live in prison, that started to produce and present our programs externally. And that led us to thinking, as sort of a post-COVID, I guess, about the talent that's available outside and about the role that we could play in helping to develop that talent beyond the gate. So we, for the first time, opened a studio outside of a prison. We got a studio in South London, and we have a talent development project. One of my team, Nancy Prentice, is our head of talent development. She's phenomenal. She was born to do that job. And she runs a project with Richie, and together they work with trainees that come out of the prison and spend a few months with us, continuing to develop their skills. And they produce, the output of that project is a podcast called Outside In, which is a great listen. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. We also, as you mentioned, we run the Life After Prison podcast, which is presented by the quite well-known Zach and Jules, the multi-award-winning Zach and Jules. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's an amazing podcast. And what that does, it takes everything that we've learned about making radio for people inside prisons over the last nearly nearly 2 decades, and is doing the same thing, but for people who've come out of prison. So trying to provide inspiration, advice, support for people after prison. And we also have, I have to mention this, the Secret Life of Prisons podcast, which I am privileged to co-host. A new episode drops every Monday. And what we try and do with that podcast is we try and shine a light into the darkest corners of prisons and the criminal justice system and talk about prisons and criminal justice in a way that is, I guess, the opposite of the sensationalized way that lots of media generally talk about prisons or crime or prison stories. And we try and humanize the people that have been involved in those things. And then we've got a number of other podcasts. I can't name them all, but it's a really important part of what we do. So yeah, National Prison Radio is still the beating heart of what we do as an organisation. Talent development's a really important part of what we do. The podcast production's a really important part of what we do. And of course, Prison Radio International is the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. It's a really exciting, growing global movement, and it's great to be part of it.
I can hear your passion about what you do and the impact that it has. What is it about audio, do you think, that connects with people and connects with you?
I think a really important thing in life, in the world, is belonging. I think a lot of the problems that we have are because of a lack of belonging. If people don't feel like they're part of a family or a community, then they're in trouble. So I think belonging is incredibly important in life in general. And I think that radio can play a really, really crucial role in helping people feel they belong to something. I think if radio's done well, regardless of the kind of radio it is, whether it's prison radio, whether it's commercial radio, whether it's hospital, public service, student, if radio's done well and if people speak into microphones with honesty and clarity, then the people listening will feel like they belong to the audience that are listening to that. They feel like they belong to the community of people that are listening to what's being said. What has always attracted me about radio is the idea that even as a vulnerable and lonely child and scared child, I could sit with my clock radio under my duvet. I could listen to Key 103, or as it was then, Piccadilly 261. I could listen to Piccadilly radio and I could listen to a late night phone in, and I could feel connected to the people whose stories I was hearing. And I think it's that connection is so, so important. And I think it's a really beautiful thing that people can just listen. And they don't have to watch. They don't have to look at a screen. They don't have to do 7 things at once. You can just close your eyes. You can drive a car. You can do the washing up. You can lie in bed. And you can be part of a community by using your ears.
A big thank you to Phil Maguire OBE for being my guest. You can find out more about the PRA on their website, prison.radio. Our Birmingham Winter Social is on the 6th of March and it's on sale now. At this event, we'll be looking forward to International Women's Day and celebrating women in audio with a panel discussion and special guests. You can book now at radioacademy.org/events/Birmingham Social. We also have our Foot in the Door event at Queen's University Belfast on the 19th of March. It's on sale now too, with new speakers being announced all the time. Check the website and our socials for details, and you can book your place at radioacademy.org/training. I'll see you next week.